Welcome to Horror Makes Us Happy, the podcast where we ask the question, what is it about horror that makes us happy? In a creepy voice. We ask it that way because you have to. Your hosts are Steve Becker and my creepy self, Chris Whitman. And you can find out more about us at our website, horrormakesushappy.com. Before we get started, this is the trigger warning. We got to do this at the beginning of every show because people can get bent out of shape sometimes. But more so just to let you know, this is a horror podcast. We're going to be talking about horror things, so it could involve sensitive subjects such as child abuse, physical abuse, rape,
Who knows?
Bad things. But it's not all about that. It is more of a psychological delve into what it is we like about horror and why you like horror and things. And with that said, Steve, what do we got coming up?
Still doing listen parties on Discord every Sunday at 7 p.m. Still doing drawing parties every Sunday at 9 p.m. on Discord. The listen parties, we stream episodes of this podcast alternating between the newest, most recent one and stuff from the back catalog. And then the drawing party is Chris working on his webcomic pieces, horror-themed webcomic pieces, I should say, which you can also find at piecesofflesh.com. You can also find my book, A Guide to the Recovery Toolbox, on Amazon and Lulu and all kinds of other websites like that. We missed a convention that we were supposed to go to last month because I wrote down the date wrong and I thought it was going to be next month. But,
it's okay, I missed one yesterday. Totally forgot about Tampa Bay Scream.
Don't.
Yep.
Looking at going to one, I think it's in September in Kentucky. I got to double check that.
They have conventions in Kentucky?
Yes, they do. Not much else going on other than that. We're still above 10 people on the guest list, so not really worth going through that. But today we are talking to author, playwright, director, actor, and musician Nat Cassidy. Nat, welcome
Many
to...
hats.
Yes.
Hello.
Hello,
Creepy voice.
Yes.
Hello.
Nat is best known for his, at least in the horror genre, known for Mary, Nestlings, and Steal the Stars. Do you want to let us know what you're currently working on?
Sure. I've got, what do I have? I have a novella with Shortwave Publications coming out in October of this year called Rest Stop, which is a kind of extreme, my attempt at like an extreme horror novella. And that's going to be a lot of fun. And then after that, my next full-length novel with Tor Nightfire is coming out in April of 2025, which feels forever from now, but we'll be here before we know it. And that's called When the Wolf Comes Home, which I'm very, very, very excited about. And hope everybody pre-orders, please. Please, God, pre-order. I'm begging you. That one's kind of like the way I've been describing it is if Mary was my homage to like unreliable narrators and serial killers and reincarnation and all that weird stuff, and Nestlings was like a 70s potboiler paranoia thriller, When the Wolf Comes Home is my homage to like 80s pulpy action horror paperback thrillers. So it's like the sort of book that you would see in like an airport or a grocery store in the 80s or 90s. It's just action set piece after action set piece. I love it.
Nice. Cool. Before we started recording, you mentioned that you had listened to one or two of our episodes, so I know you know what you're getting into.
I'm excited. Let's bare my soul.
Yes,
that's what we do.
Starting with childhood, what are some of your first memories of scary things?
Man, I was a scared kid. I had a very overactive imagination. I mean, one of the reasons why I love this show and I'm excited to be on it is like it's a topic that I think about and talk about all the time. I go into it a lot in my in like the wraparound material of my books too, the forwards and afterwards that I write, because I've always just been fascinated by the relationship between mental health and genre, but horror in particular. And when I was a kid, I was always into horror. From the earliest I can remember, like if you wanted to get me to pay attention, a scary story was the way to do it, or something with monsters, something with death and blood and guts and stuff like that. I was just a very morbid kid. And I was also constantly terrified, probably because that's like what I was consuming, what I was drawn to. But I was also at that point kind of working up the calluses that I needed to be able to like safely consume it. So every shadow was full of monsters. Every possibility was the worst case scenario. I attribute some of that to the fact that I was raised by a single mom and she had MS, and it was just kind of always known from the outset that she had this disease, this debilitating disease. At the time, it was there are two types of MS. There's relapse remitting, and there's progressive. And at the time, it was relapse remitting, which means she would just like have bad MS attacks and then recover. And one of my earliest memories is an ambulance taking her away when she was having a really bad MS attack when I was probably like 3. But she would always recover and then, raise me and my brother on her own. But even at that point, it was known to us that it was going to get worse. Eventually, it would kind of tip over into the progressive side, which it did. And so that was just like always hanging over our heads that our caretaker, our primary caretaker, the person who was there to protect us, was in the grips of this disease that was going to deteriorate her faculties and faster than it would in a normal case. So there was always this kind of existential dread growing up when I was a kid. We're also I'm third generation American. My grandmother emigrated from Poland in the late 1920s, and we're Jewish. And there was my mom was obsessed with the Holocaust and the family members that we lost in the Holocaust and stuff like that. So on top of MS, there was also genocide just kind of hovering over our consciousness growing up. And it was just this big question of how does something like that happen? Are we ever truly safe? These big, heavy fucking questions for a little kid to deal with.
Yeah, these are heavy things to deal with.
And one of the things I'm like the most grateful for is that my mom was a no bullshitter. She didn't sugarcoat any of this from me and my brother. And she was also a huge genre fiction fan and genre movie fan.
Okay.
She loved sci-fi. She loved horror. This is also, I was born in 1981. So this is, the 80s and 90s. Hell yeah, 81. Class of 2000.
99 for me. It's
sellout. I was born in September, so I got to be one of the old ones in the next class.
Are you only saying that because that was the name of the movie?
No way, man.
Was it the same? Wait. Maybe I'm just thinking of Faculty. I thought it was Class of 99, but maybe there was a song on the soundtrack.
There might have been a song on the soundtrack. I think that's what you're thinking of. Yeah, it was called The Faculty. Yeah, so like when I was growing up, this was like the height of, Stephen King and Dean Koontz and Anne Rice and Clive Barker and Robin Cook and Michael Crichton and all that stuff. So like she would read these books and talk to me about these books, and we would watch the movies that they were based on and other like 80s horror movies and stuff like that. And it was a way for her to kind of also digest what she was going through and, give us a frame of reference to talk. I mean, like MS is a terrifying disease, but when you're watching The Fly, it's kind of less terrifying. And also it's a way that we can kind of talk about what it's like when the body starts to decay. Is this heavy enough? Is this deep enough right from the start?
It is. Yeah. The Fly being an analogy for your mother's MS. That's a good one.
That is a good one. Yeah, that's got layers to it.
Yeah, we're just getting started.
Yeah, right. You mentioned a number of authors, mainly referring to stuff your mother was reading, but was there any particular content that you recall consuming on your own?
Yeah, books were a massive part of my growing up because we had no money, and these were the days before streaming libraries where you had every movie at your beck and call. So we only had the movies that we either owned or would come on TV. We didn't even have cable. So I was very limited but very limited to the stories that I could get my hands on. And we grew up not on the wrong side of the tracks, but we grew up on the tracks. At that point, I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona. And at that point, it was still kind of in the beginning of its very metastasizing sprawl across its real estate. It was big, but it wasn't as big as and sprawling as it has become. And we were kind of on the very outer limits of civilization, so to speak. And so on one side of the intersection that I grew up on, there was our grocery store, and there was a great bookstore that I would go to called The Tattered Page, and a movie theater and stuff like that. And then on the other side was a used car lot, a leather shop, a bong shop, and then just open desert. There was just nothing, and a lot of gangs, a lot of violence and stuff like that, a lot of crime. But behind our house, there just happened to be the Maricopa County Library. And so we would spend all of our time in the library. It was also free air conditioning.
Yes.
So it was a very handy place to have so close by. But my mom had a bookshelf in our living room, and she, being a single working mom with a disease, had very little time and energy to like safeguard what I was consuming.
Mm-hmm.
She was basically of the opinion of like, if you think you can handle it, fucking go to town. Just don't come crying to me if it messes you up.
Right.
Because I don't have the time for that. And I took that rubric very seriously.
If you don't like it, put it down.
Exactly. If you can't handle this, it is on you to stop yourself from reading it.
Mm-hmm.
So there, I can even remember it to this day, the way those books kind of sat on the shelf in like this sort of vaulted position. And
taunting you.
And I was like, am I ready for Dean Koontz's Lightning yet? And I would like pick it off. And very early on, I realized I was ready for it. And I had a hunger for it. And Stephen King in particular was, I know I'm the first to say this, but he was like the most important literary figure in my life from like probably age 7 on. Actually, that's not entirely accurate. There are 2 incredibly prominent literary figures for me. And this will sound precocious as fuck to get into, but I promise it's important to my backstory. It was Stephen King and Shakespeare. Those were the 2 authors that I was obsessed with growing up.
Good choices.
Yeah,
Solid
exactly. And they have a lot in common, as I used to rankle my English major friends by saying. But I stand by that. I've been an actor since I was like 5 years old, a very precocious little child actor. And I've been doing Shakespeare since I was about 6 and obsessed with Shakespeare since I was 6. And that's not separate to my being a horror nut. That's because I was already a horror nut. And I fell in love hard with Macbeth and with Hamlet and King Lear and these stories of murder and madness and stuff like that.
I'm wondering if your connection between the 2 is the morality.
That's a big part of it. It's the morality and it's the existentialism. It's the idea of fate kind of entrapping us in an eventual decay and decline. And what do we do with that time that we're given?
It's funny that you say that, because for me, the fate tied into the morality. It's you got this because you did this.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. And like, I don't know about you guys, but for me, sometimes it seesaws. Sometimes I feel like it's causal, and sometimes I feel like it's just random. And I don't know. I haven't sat down to think about whether or not that's because I'm like doing well in a moment or doing ill in a moment. But sometimes it feels very much like there's sort of karmic retribution, and sometimes it feels like it's a fucking free for all.
True.
Yeah, we're a very confused little.
That is life.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
swings and roundabouts. But yeah, so all of which is to say, like, I would read and perform and watch Shakespeare, and I would read and obsess with Stephen King from about 6 or 7. And my mom had this prescription, basically. Her rule was you can take out whatever you want, but you also have, for every horror novel you get, you have to get a classic also.
Ooh.
Okay.
And she didn't define what that meant. She, it just had to be like, it just had to have the blessing of the fucking Western canon, more or less.
There's some variety,
Yeah, exactly. So it could be
logic.
Jane Austen. It could be Dostoevsky. It could be the most depressing, violent novel imaginable, or it could be something a little more lighthearted and comedic. That didn't matter as long as
educate yourself.
Exactly. Don't limit yourself only to reading John Saul, which is good advice no matter what. Sorry, John Saul, if you're out there.
Yes.
But yeah, so that like kind of contributed to.
So hang on, because I'm the one that has to edit these calls. Let's.
I do a lot of run-on sentences too, so good luck with the editing.
Yeah. From the psychological standpoint, often the first couple things that come off the top of our head for a reason. You've mentioned Stephen King was very important to you. So if I were to say most important book to you,
my go-to answer is It.
Okay.
Because that to me is more Stephen King. It's the same reason why I always say my favorite Beatles album is the White Album, just because it's the most Beatles. It's got the most songs. And so It is just like all of it there. It's not always my go-to or anything like that. I mean, I've read it.
Mathematically, it's the most sensible.
Yeah, exactly. It's got all the things I like. The Stand was probably a second favorite, and Salem's Lot. I read all those.
Hang on. Not done with it. You said it's got all the things you like. What are all the things you like about
Monsters.
Okay.
Monsters,
Mm-hmm.
death, fear,
Yep.
heroism, tragedy, friendship. That's another. I mean, if we're gonna really get into the things that are commonality in the stories that I am drawn to, found family and companionship that's always been a big hunger of mine. I think because I felt so literally alone all the time growing up, just being home alone. We lived very far away from all of my friends. We lived outside of the school district. So any story that's about people finding each other and gaining strength from that, from their numbers, was always like a big thing for me.
So same kind of question with Shakespeare. Biggest, most important thing to you in his work?
Macbeth is always the one that I come back to again and again. Like that was the first one I read, which is a very funny story. I was a piece of shit kid. Like I was a terror.
I mean, all us 80s kids were,
Seriously. And I was like,
we didn't have the internet. We had nothing else to do.
Yeah. What are we going to do? We're going to light fires in the classroom.
Yeah.
All we had was a fucking TI-82 calculator to play Snake on. You got to give us something else. But no, I was like very hyperactive. I was very aggressive at being a smart piece of shit. So I mouthed off all the time from a very early age. And I would literally like set fires in the back of the classroom. I would carve curse words into the desk and stuff like that. Until I was in like 5th or 6th grade, I wasn't even allowed to have my own desk. I had to sit at the teacher's desk. That was my writing platform. I would spend most recesses having to sit on the wall. That was what they called it, because I would just like throw rocks at cars and things like that.
Delinquency.
Yeah, exactly. I was a bad kid. Like in 1st grade, they literally had to invent a system whereby I had to bring a red or a green card home to show my mom to prove whether I had a good or bad day. And she would have to sign off on it, and I would bring it back to school until I learned how to forge her signature. But this 1st grade teacher obviously hated me, and I fucking hated her. We were just nemesis. And she was this old woman. Mrs. Shapiro was her name. And she was Greek also, like from Greece. And she was showing the class slides from a trip to Greece that she had taken over some break or something like that. One of the slides was an amphitheater, an ancient Greek amphitheater. And she told us that she saw a production of Macbeth in this amphitheater.
Nice.
I don't know why this woman started telling a group of 1st graders the plot of Macbeth, but she did. And
it's a little early.
Yeah, it's a little early. It's a bit much. But
and
to
she
her
got
credit,
it wrong and you corrected her? Oh,
no, this was before I really knew anything about Shakespeare. And to her credit, she noticed that I started paying attention when she was talking about witches and regicide and things like that. And so she basically...
Now we're talking.
Yeah, right?
Right.
She challenged me to read Macbeth. It was kind of like a put up or shut up, you piece of shit kid. And I wasn't going to let a challenge go unheeded, so I did. And it was like for the rest of the semester, my mom and I every night would sit down with Macbeth. And my mom knew fuck all about Shakespeare. She didn't know anything about Shakespeare, so she was kind of learning it with me. That was enough for me to make me obsessed with Shakespeare. And then I quickly started moving on to things like Hamlet and King Lear and Timon of Athens, of all things, because I thought, based on a drawing, I thought that was going to be a similarly horrific story.
Did you have any really scary dreams or reoccurring nightmares when you were a kid?
I was like in ballet. So I was in a ballet class in this dream and wearing like a tutu. And, I was a theater kid. So like, it wasn't like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm in a ballet class wearing a tutu. It was just like, oh no, I'm getting ballet training.
That part's normal.
Yeah, exactly. It was just like, I guess I'm in
do.
Yeah.
I don't know why I was wearing a tutu at the time, but it was a very clear visual signifier that I was in a ballet class.
Yes.
And a monster started attacking the city.
So you're fighting the monster in your tutu?
No, it wasn't about fighting. This is what makes it so appropriate to the things we've already been talking about.
Okay.
I was in class. We hear the city being destroyed, so we run out of the dance studio, and I can see the monster destroying the city, getting closer and closer. And the prevailing feeling is, I'm too small to run away. This thing is coming for us, and I cannot escape it. And I had that dream several times. And then, even in adulthood, every now and then I've had a dream that is not that dream, but it evokes that similar feeling, watching a mushroom cloud erupt over the Manhattan skyline or something like that, and just knowing like, wow, in like 10 seconds, that's it. Like that shockwave is going to come get me. And so it was a feeling of helplessness. It was the opposite of like, I have to fight this monster. It was just like, here it is. Like, here comes the end. Not very deep. Like even in the context of all the things we've already been discussing, like I feel like the meaning of that is just like right there. It's very obvious what these feelings were evoking and attempting to metabolize. But it was a very real feeling. I can still see that dream crystal clear.
It's not even necessarily a childhood thing, because there was a long time where I was driving from Tampa to Fort Lauderdale for work every week. Basically, I would drive home on the weekends and rent a place down in Fort Lauderdale. And so it's like a 3.5, 4 hour drive each way, and had plenty of time to think as I'm driving. And I remember more than once, I had probably seen on YouTube or something, a video of an asteroid crashing into the planet. And it's like, what would I do? Like, I'm in the middle of, between Fort Lauderdale and Tampa. Like I'm on the highway. There's probably not much around, like maybe middle of the Everglades. Like, what am I going to do? Call somebody? Like, there's not a whole lot you can do.
Yeah. You just got to wait for it to roll over you.
Yeah.
There was a book I read.
Run and
yeah, exactly. And just kind of like, I hope this doesn't hurt. There was a book that I read a few years ago. I think it's called The Last Days of the Dinosaurs. It's a nonfiction book. It's just about, the extinction event. But there was something to it that I found so disturbing. I know I'm skipping ahead on the timeline, but you'll appreciate this in context of that thought. They described the physical sensation of what it would have been like to have been, just outside the blast radius of the asteroid, and how the ground would have turned to rubber. Mm-hmm. So the asteroid impacts the Earth at such a velocity that it causes these, these several ripples to go out, hundreds, thousands of miles. And so dinosaurs would have literally been trampolined into the air several times. And it's this weird, absurd image of, these massive, giant creatures just launched into the sky and having no idea what is going on, and like bounced repeatedly because the Earth was kind of rubberized for a few.
I don't know about repeatedly. It was a dinosaur on the first bounce.
Yeah, exactly. Like, for those that didn't die immediately, like there was something about it that was so funny and then so horrifying to think of, like, oh my God, what would that have been like?
Hilarious and horrifying.
Yeah, like to just like the Earth suddenly turns into a fucking rubber ball.
Like when you hear about the theory, I don't know, I've never fact checked it, but like supposedly if your chute doesn't open from parachuting, you bounce.
You do bounce.
Like that's hilarious and horrifying at the same time.
Right, the dead cat bounce.
One of our previous guests mentioned that on a recent call. Who was that?
Oh shit! Yeah, who was that?
The one that lived in St. Louis.
Kosniewski, wasn't it?
Was it Kosniewski? No, I don't think so.
You joked earlier about starting off heavy. We started off with his childhood, and he's like, "So I saw a man die when he parachuted once."
Yeah, it's gonna bug me now. I'd have to go back and figure out who it was, but yeah, it was somebody was trying to pull off some stunt where they parachuted onto the St. Louis Arch and then planned to jump off of it, but somehow got caught on the arch and wound up sliding down the whole thing.
Jesus.
And he said he witnessed the bounce.
Oof.
Yeah.
Oof.
So, yeah.
I did apparently see someone die when I was a kid too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But I have more clear memories of being ushered away from it than of the actual death. But it was at the Renaissance Fair when I was like 10.
Oh, wow.
That's a strange place.
Was it a jousting?
A jouster, wrong? Yeah. And apparently
holy shit, called it.
Yeah. Some kid shot like a slingshot at the horse, and so the horse knocked the guy off. And so like when that happened, we all got ushered out, and then we found out later that the guy had like broken his neck or something like that.
Hope that kid got in trouble.
I imagine that kid got in trouble. I should fucking hope so. There have been times where I'm like, I kind of want to comb through Phoenix newspaper archives to see if I can actually confirm whether this happened, because it's far enough away now in my past that I'm like, has this become fictionalized? It's been a very clear memory for a very long time, but now I kind of want to confirm it. This death at the Ren Fair.
So I was about to ask if there was a time when you were actually terrified of something in real life. That would fit. Yeah, right.
I don't remember feeling any fear over it or anything like that. It was
ushered away.
Yeah, it was just kind of like, shit, that happened. And by that point I was a morbid kid with a sick sense of humor. So I probably it's the older I get now that like those kind of things are sadder and more horrific to me. But as a kid, I was probably like, holy shit, man. Yeah. Just a little.
I'm invincible.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing can harm me.
Right. Flipping the question around then, was there ever a time in your childhood when you felt completely calm or safe or at bliss?
I love that question. I love the questions that you guys have put together for this survey. Yeah, I would say being out in the desert, being out, in a calm, peaceful night. There's nothing like that. Even before I started doing illicit substances, there was something about just like connecting with nature. There's nothing like the desert. The desert is I'm very romantic about the desert. And increasingly so the longer I live away from it. I've lived in New York City for 20 years. So I miss the desert viscerally, especially like at night or watching a sunset, or, during monsoons when it's actually raining for the only time in the year.
Do you live in the city?
I do, yeah.
If I can make a suggestion?
Sure.
Go to the beach at night.
Yeah, no, the beach at night is a very similar thing. Although, you know what? Shit. I can answer your question even better, because I drowned several times as a kid. And so deep water. What? Yeah, I drowned
in the desert.
In a swimming pool when I was like probably 7 or 8. No, I must have been like 6.
Really? Where? Arizona? What?
Exactly. Just, we didn't have a lot of water to practice in. And then there is, I can't believe I forgot about this until just now. So you guys are dredging things up. This is good. This is the good shit. There in northern Arizona, in Sedona, there is a natural, I don't know, it's a park. It's a natural phenomenon called Slide Rock. And it's a bunch of kind of streams and rivers that have been worn away by the water. And so they form these massive river rocks that are very smooth. And you literally slide down them into pools of water, into these natural reservoirs. It's beautiful. Northern Arizona is its own separate ecosystem, and it's also just absolutely gorgeous. And I slid down a rock and into a pool, and my foot got jammed in the reservoir. So, I was so close to the surface of the water, but I couldn't get out. And there is a movie that I'm sure you both are familiar with, being that we're of the same generation, Legend, the Tom Cruise, Tim Curry movie,
Yep.
Where he dives in to like get the ring or something like that. And then he swims back up to the surface and the water has turned to glass and he can't get out. It was that feeling. And that movie fucked me up because it evoked, I don't remember which came first, but they became like inextricably intertwined after this experience of just that feeling of like the surface of the water is so close, but I'm stuck. I can't get out. And so like to this day, I hate deep water. I love the beach. I love the ocean, but I don't fuck with it. I don't go into it.
So how'd you get out?
I don't remember. Someone pulled me out. And this similarly with the earlier encounter when I fell into a swimming pool when I was like 5 and I couldn't swim. Somebody fished me out. I think I had to be resuscitated. But yeah, all I remember is the sinking and the not being able to get out, which is also of a piece of that feeling of like the monster attacking the city. Like it's just all helplessness. It's all this feeling of encroaching doom. But yeah, I don't fuck around with water where I can't stand. I don't mind a swimming pool anymore. I can swim in the deep end of a swimming pool, but I don't like it. I love being in water. I love appreciating the beach and the ocean and stuff like that. But I do not mess around with water that's so deep I can't see through it. And the beach at night, no fucking thank you. Dark water.
I didn't mean to go in the water.
Yes, no, you're right. It's that same sense of like awe and smallness and beauty. Like you are right. It's a very similar vibe going to the beach at night.
So last 2 questions for the childhood section. We asked them in pairs. Going to start with the negative one so we can end on the positive one. Do you remember the first person you hurt?
I remember early memories of hurt. I don't know if they were the first people I hurt. I mean, again, I was a fucking nightmare of a kid. So I went out of my way to hurt adults at like every chance I could get. I made teachers cry, and I feel, tremendous guilt over that as a more sentient being. And I certainly, even if I didn't make them cry, I made their lives miserable. But I, even at a very early age, also dealt with a tremendous amount of guilt. Like anytime I hurt somebody, I would probably be okay for a month or two, and then out of nowhere, like I'm talking like full on panic attacks of just feeling so guilty. And that has continued basically throughout my life. It's one of the reasons why I try and conduct myself as well as I can, because the idea of negatively impacting someone else's life is like nausea provoking.
Did that start later, or did that also happen as a child?
No, that was as a child. Like for instance, I got really good at stealing, like probably around like 9 or 10 or something like that. Like I developed a system, and we had no money. So like if I wanted toys, I would either have to like wait for the one time a year where I got them, or like I would have to fucking take them.
Yeah. For me, it was candy and food, but yes.
Yeah. But toys were more important. We had such good toys in the 90s and 80s. But I developed a system with our local supermarket, which was called Smitty's back in the day. I think it's now a Safeway. But I figured out how to steal toys from them very efficiently.
Your mom's like, where do you keep getting these?
I would usually like hide them, and she didn't have much time to like go through my toy chest or anything like that.
Got it.
Or I would say like, yeah, I'm borrowing it from a friend or something like that. And I'm sure she was like, fuck, I don't know what this kid is doing. No, I'm just not going to ask.
Put 2 and 2 together and just didn't.
Yeah, exactly. It's like when I used to get like really high or drunk, and I'd come home and be like, hey, I'm home. She doesn't know. And she'd probably be like, oh my God, he's so fucking drunk right now.
Right.
As long as he's alive.
Yeah.
But I did that for months and was, kind of proud of myself. Look at what I'm doing. And then out of nowhere, in the middle of the night, I woke up, cold sweats, wanted to throw up, heart racing, like all of the physical attributes of a full-on panic attack, and woke my mom up and confessed everything. It was this absolute need to purge this guilt, this sin that I had committed. So I confessed everything, and she very calmly, we figured out what to do to redress what I'd done, and I gave some of my favorite toys to a homeless shelter, and I wrote a letter to the store telling them what I had done. It was, I literally needed to expiate this crime that I had committed, and that need to confess, that need to purge, has never gone away. Like I, even in my 20s and 30s, like I would have like horrible intrusive thoughts, and going into therapy was a big boon for me, because it gave me a place to kind of vent those sort of things. But yeah, the guilt was pathological. It wasn't a healthy relationship to guilt. It was a very pathological response to doing something wrong.
I can't remember if you said it during the recording or before we started recording, but you talking about coming from a Jewish background. Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't there a tradition where once a year, I can't remember what it's called, but there's
Yom
tradition.
Kippur. I think it's what you're thinking of.
Is it Yom Kippur?
Where you you cast your sins into the water, and you fast for a day, and it's the day of atonement,
right?
Where you think about your sins and all the things you've done wrong.
Do you think it was related to that, or is it just like a one-off, or not related to that?
Who knows? Like I hated Yom Kippur as a kid because it was no fun. You had to
Maybe because you had to do that.
I mean, from what you've said about your attitude as a child, you were very defensive and combative anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, it tracks. It's just like any kind of holiday. It's like, I fucking hate it. What do you mean I have to do it?
It's punishment.
Fuck you.
But I have always,
particularly in this case, is what do you mean I have to like make atonement for the things I did wrong?
Yeah, that too.
Right? Well, like that. It was less like I didn't do anything. It wasn't like defensive, deflective, but it was like, I don't want to be punished for it. It was like a childish, like kind of whinging.
Yeah.
But like
more
I do
like accepting, yeah, I did that, but I don't want
exactly
consequences.
Can't it not matter?
Yeah.
And since like the older I get, like actually I love Yom Kippur. I think that is an incredibly beautiful holiday. I understand now why it is like the holiest day of the year, to kind of sit and reflect on the things you've done wrong.
So given what you just said about potentially feeling like it was like whinging or something around Yom Kippur, do you think that the thing that you mentioned a few minutes before that about having the really guilty conscience and waking your mom up, do you think that was not related to Yom Kippur? Was that like something else going on?
Yeah, if anything, maybe it was a cultural awareness of doing the right thing. And, you know, I think I'm maybe accidentally making my mom out to seem like very laissez-faire when it came to raising a kid, but she had a very strict moral compass. She was an incredibly moral person, and that sense of morality was entrenched in me from as long as I can remember. So it's not like I was amoral. I was just very selfishly thinking. Yeah, I was a shitty, like, you know, kid. I was immature, but I've also always been, in ways kind of to my detriment, a very empathetic person. And so it was just like that empathy kind of acted on a delay. So I would do something selfish, and it wasn't until I started thinking about it from somebody else's point of view that I realized how bad it was, and the empathy turned on. And it was like, oh my God, if that had happened to me, I would have been so upset. I would have been so hurt. And I can't believe I did that to someone else.
Moving into teenagers, if we were to pick like the first 3 things that come off the top of your head of, you know, horror media in your teenage years, what would jump out to you?
I mean, it would still be Stephen King. I was still reading, you know, from Rose Matter on, I was reading every new release, like live as it came out. So it was definitely Stephen King. That's when I started really getting into Peter Straub too. Mm-hmm. And so Ghost Story I still will say that's my favorite book of all time, just as kind of like my default. And what else? Like horror movies in general, like, you know, we're getting into the teenage years, so we're talking like mid to late 90s, and it was kind of a fallow period for horror. Not the greatest horror movies of all time, but some that are fucking bangers, but also like a lot of Scream ripoffs and really, really shitty 90s horror that I love, don't get me wrong, but they do kind of blur together.
So is this where we would put Candyman?
Candyman, that was a little younger. That came out in 1990. Okay. So I wasn't quite a teenager yet, but I still loved Candyman.
Okay.
I know where you screamed last faculty.
Yeah, exactly. Am I remembering Urban Legend or am I remembering Valentine? I don't know. They're all kind of the same experience. But that's also, I will say, being 18 in 1999, maybe the greatest year for movies in general, was a big, important impact on me. So it wasn't just horror movies, but like getting to see like Magnolia and Three Kings and like just all these incredible artsy movies that had wide releases, that made a huge impact on me as just like a storyteller and a story consumer. Mm-hmm. That was a big passion of mine, was like just cinema in general became a big deal. Okay. Oh, and Demon Knight. Demon Knight's one of my all-time favorite movies, and I was like 13 or 14 when that came out. Can't forget Tales from the Crypt, Demon Knight.
Can't forget that one.
Right?
Tis a classic.
It's one of the best movies ever made. That movie fucking rocks.
What'd you like about Ghost Story?
Ghost Story, I loved the sprawl of it. I loved the scope of it. You know, similar to It, like there are like 9 different stories within that book. So if you can tell a story that has a lot of variety, maybe it's my latent ADHD, but if you can have a lot of variety within a central spine of a story, I love that, because I feel like I'm getting more bang for your buck. And I feel like I love the polyphony of it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there's something about the sprawl. There's something about the layers of Ghost Story. Every time I read it, which is pretty frequently, I feel like I learn something new. I see something new in it.
I'm sorry, I just have to interject. Latent?
Man, I don't even remember what context I said latent, and it was just a second ago.
ADHD.
Oh, yeah. Well, I've never been diagnosed. That's why.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
Same.
It's funny that you mentioned polyphony, because that's a sort of connecting tissue there, too.
Yeah.
I also want to compliment you on your lexicon, sir, because polyphony, what was the other one? Primacy? Never heard that one before. Did you say mitzvot, as in like the past tense of mitzvah?
No, mitzvot is plural.
Plural.
Yeah.
Plautus.
You know, the first time I heard the word polyphony was when I was reading analysis on Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov when I was like 13. I was like, damn, that's a good word. I like polyphony. So I come back to polyphony a lot.
Smart kid.
It's funny because when you brought up It's funny when you brought up late 90s, I thought you were going to talk about music because as a musician, well, amateur musician, whatever you want to say, for me, the 90s was best because of music. So when you said polyphony, obviously that's my first
right. There's also, I think that's polyphonic.
Yeah, you were thinking of the polyphonic spree? No, music we haven't even touched on it. Music is like one of the most important things in my life. Yeah. But I was also a real fucking snobby classic rock fan. So I usually came to 90s music after the fact because I was like, ugh, it's on the radio. I don't care. It's not Led Zeppelin.
Don't get me wrong. The first CDs I ever bought were the 4-disc box set of Zeppelin. So
yes, I was in a Zeppelin and Pink Floyd cover band, and our bassist was Ben Sinclair from High Maintenance. Just going back to one of my oldest friends. You can watch video of us playing Another Brick in the Wall Part 2.
Cool.
On Vimeo. Yeah.
Speaking of which, while you guys were talking earlier, I did look up the faculty, and that was what I was thinking of. Was they did Another Brick in the Wall, and they, it was like I won't say super group, but like Lane Staley and a couple other artists put it together, and they said they titled themselves Class of 92.
Class of 92.
Right. Or sorry, not 92, 99. What the fuck?
99. Yeah. I always laughed at the Class of 99. As a Class of 2000, I was like, yeah, you poor suckers.
Yeah. Okay, so back to Ghost Story. 9 stories, polyphony. What else did you like about it?
I mean, Peter Straub is a exquisite prosmith. He writes beautiful sentences, chilly and smart and witty.
I'm going to cut you off quickly this time.
Do it.
We have learned in the past that so there are things that when you talk to somebody who's a creative, they tend to have kind of group things into two different groups. There are things that you like because you are an auteur and you appreciate the art that someone else has made, and then there's other things that you like just because you're a fan of some piece of the content, if that makes sense. And it sounded like what you're about to go into was appreciating his art for the sake of the art. And the gist that I want to get into was there's something that you liked about Ghost Story that spoke to you more as the individual, not the artist.
I loved how it was propulsive. I loved how it was nasty and gnarly. And you want to talk about like learning words like exsanguination was a word that I learned from Ghost Story because the livestock was all exsanguinated. I love that image of just like these fucking cows that are just like emptied in the middle of a field somewhere. Like it sticks in my brain. And the Fenny and Gregory Bate storyline and stuff like that. But then also he got into my brain with his word games and like naming everybody after Gothic writers like Hawthorne and James and things like that. And also the constant recurrence of A.M., Alma Mobley and you know her various iterations, and the idea that a ghost is me. I am you, she keeps saying over and over again, and her initials are A.M. I am you, and I am a ghost. I am, there's very little separating me from a specter, from something that is a revenant, that is undead, but also dead. And so like those almost worked like a little bit of a virus. Let's skip ahead a few years to the movie Pontypool, if you've ever seen that. Like that had a similar reaction of just like, oh my God, language is a self-replicating virus. I can't get it out of my head. So I loved that element of Ghost Story. I loved that on the surface, it's a very simple tale of a bunch of old dudes commit a crime. They start paying for it. Talk about guilt. They start paying for it as old men. That's a very simple story, but then you get down to it and it's, about why we tell scary stories. It's about why we tell ghost stories. It's about how every ghost story is in essence sitting down with your own mortality and saying, I am the ghost here. I am going to die and I don't understand death and maybe I deserve death. And how do I fight that? And I used to get a big kick out of, because by this point I had other literate friends who were very smart and, I'm in high school at this point and this is the 90s, and Stephen King was at his lowest critical ebb. So as a Stephen King obsessive, I would get a lot of shit from adults for reading Stephen King. They would be like, "Oh God, you're reading that." Nobody liked Stephen King in the literati circles.
That's right. I was a Packers fan in the 80s.
Yeah, you know the feeling. Pre-Favre years, and I would use Ghost Story as my shield. And I would say, read Ghost Story. And they would read it and they'd be like, wow, this actually has a lot going on. This is very smart. This is literature. And I'd be like, yeah, this guy fucking works with Stephen King. Like Stephen King and this guy work on the same levels. But there was something about the package and the lack of critical baggage that Peter Straub had that was like my defense mechanism to people who were really looking down on horror. So that was a big, undeniable asset to Ghost Story as well.
Okay. What'd you like about Demon Knight?
Oh my God, what's not to like about Demon Knight?
It's not.
The effects, the humor. Billy Zane is fucking amazing. CCH Pounder is fucking amazing. Jada Pinkett was fucking amazing. And I love the diversity of it too. Like, it's directed by a black man. It's the hero is a black woman who's like really down on her luck and lower class and like not the typical horror movie hero fighting this fucking charming, beautiful white man. I don't care. I don't care what anybody says. Billy Zane in that era was just fucking a specimen of beauty. God, what a handsome, charming motherfucker. And I was already a huge Tales from the Crypt fan anyway, so seeing Tales from the Crypt on the big screen was also just like a total delight. The soundtrack fucking rocks. It's Filter's best song, Hey Man, Nice Shot, as an opening song for a fucking car crash is just exquisite. I loved everything about Demon Knight, and I still do. It still holds up. And it was set in the desert, like growing up in the desert.
Yeah, there you go.
Through movies.
Got that familiarity to it.
Yeah, like Demon Knight, like The Prophecy with Christopher Walken and stuff like that. Every now and then you would see the desert and you'd be like, holy shit. I didn't know other people like could make movies in the desert. In my sort of, again, growing up as a Stephen King fan, you would think all horror needs to be in New England. It all needs to be in Maine. But no, like it was like, holy shit, I'm seeing something in my backyard.
Cool. Let's see. So you mentioned having other literary friends in high school. Were they horror fans, or did you have other horror fans in high school?
No, they were. My closest friends were not horror guys. I was also friends with a bunch of goth kids, and they were much more horror. It's weird. Like again, coming from a very huge high school, there wasn't so much a hierarchy as there was just kind of
different circles.
Yeah, exactly. So I was relatively popular. I was
different tribes.
Tribes is a great way to put it. Like everyone had their tribes, and there's a porous border in between these tribes.
Yeah,
because there were just too many people. Like people had bullies. I had bullies. I avoided certain people, but they didn't like define your life. They were just like, oh, that I don't like that kid. They're an asshole, so I'm just not going to deal with them. And the campus was so huge, and you had so many other social circles to integrate into that there was no sense of like the popular kids versus unpopular kids. But I was a very well-known kid through a lot of social circles because I was the president of the drama club and was this, in all the plays and would do the sketch comedy show and all that stuff and occasionally be on the announcements. Like I was just a well-known person. So I got to move through a lot of circles. Okay. And by this point, I was not an asshole. Like I was very much trying to be a good person by this point.
I'm sure that helped.
Yeah, it did help. Yeah, I tried to be a friend to all and just kind of, would fail occasionally. But so I had like the goth friends that I could talk about horror with or go see Rocky Horror with or, go see if like an Evil Dead movie was playing at the indie theater, we'd go see that and stuff like that. And then my other friends, my closer friends were kind of all theater kids. So we were just like the theater kids, and they were smart and had their own literary opinions and stuff like that. But it wasn't necessarily horror.
Any scary dreams or recurring dreams in your teens?
No, not by this point.
Okay.
By this point, I looked forward to nightmares, and so they happened less frequently.
Of course,
because I loved a scary dream, and so they wouldn't come to me. Anything
in real life terrify you as a teen?
Yeah. Oh my God, I was such a fucking hopeless romantic at this point. Any upheaval in my romantic life was all consuming.
It's not uncommon.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a big source point of stress in your teen years.
Yeah. And that was true through college. Like I was so in love with being in love. That's where the real agita and angst came from. Monsters I could handle. And yeah, like the old phobias were just still there. I didn't go in a pool. I didn't swim in the ocean. And you know what? Watching my mom, by this point, my mom was starting to deteriorate pretty rapidly. So that was a fear. Like, what are we going to do when this gets too bad?
Yeah.
How are we going to take care of her? we don't have money. What's going to happen when I go to college? Which was, something she was very big on. She did not want her disease to impact me and my brother and to trap us.
Of course.
So she was very big on you've got to live your life. We'll figure it out. But don't stay home. Don't take care of me.
Right.
So it was like those fears, which is just fucking depressing.
Understandable, though. I mean,
yeah, they were all very practical. Like they weren't what ifs. They were like what when.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Flipping that question around, was there ever a time in your teens when you felt completely calm or safe or bliss?
Yeah, I mean the romantic stuff for sure.
Just gonna say.
Yeah.
And
it's funny. It's a source of stress and bliss.
Oh yeah. That's why we were chasing it for sure. And I had my primary high school girlfriend in particular. Like we had a lovely couple of years. And a lot of adventures and stuff like that. And also, performing. Like this is when I started to really get good and good roles. At one point, I got to go to New York to compete in this national Shakespeare competition in Lincoln Center, and that just felt like an incredibly special thing. And there was moments of triumph like that were very impactfound.
Okay.
And sketch comedy and just making a crowd laugh and stuff like that. And I was doing a lot of drugs by this point. So I found a lot of bliss that way as well.
Yeah.
That also helps.
Yes. Natural and artificial.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Moving into adult years. So you mentioned Pontypool. Was there anything else that, if you were to list the top 2 or 3 things that jumped out to you as relating to, horror or whatever that jumps out to you for your adult years?
Old Boy, which is not quite horror, but that's one of my favorite movies.
Okay.
We count it as horror.
Audition. What else? Lake Mungo. Threads is a favorite.
Oh,
Martyrs.
I still have to watch that.
Oh my god, it'll ruin your week. Threads,
I'm sure it will.
Fucking effective.
I'll never look at a fucking plastic bag the same way again.
Nope. Martyrs is, I think, one of my favorite horror movies ever made. Because I think it functions as a thesis project for horror in general, and using horrific things to kind of understand mortality. As far as American movies go, I'm a massive David Lynch fan. I think David Lynch hits me on levels that no one else does. Firewalk with Me, I think, is an absolutely perfect horror movie.
I still haven't seen it.
Mulholland Drive. Oh, you're in for a treat. That's what that's another nice thing about getting to a certain age. When I was a kid, I would have been like, "What the fuck are you talking about? You've never seen Twin Peaks?" And now I'm like, "God bless it, man. You got a great fucking."
There you go. Yeah, look at it as a boon. You have that ahead of you.
I envy you. You get to experience Twin Peaks for the first time.
Are you familiar with the XKCD about 10,000?
Oh, I don't think so. What is that?
I'll send it to you. It's just a brief little comic. I'll send it to you.
Oh, is that the line drawings guy? Yeah. I remember. I've seen stuff of his, but I don't know if I know specifically what you're talking about. So I look forward to
one of today's 10,000.
Oh yeah.
I welcome it. Yeah, and I don't know. Impetigore is a great Indonesian horror movie. There's a lot of Spanish and Mexican horror movies that I love.
Was it When Evil Lurks?
I fucking love When Evil Lurks and Aterrados, Terrified.
I still have to watch Terrified.
Oh, it's so good. I fucking love it.
Same director, right?
Yeah, same director. Just exquisite. Yeah, I love it. I love a good horror movie. It's hard to define exactly what a good horror movie is, but it's like pornography. You know it when you see it.
Right.
That's the Supreme Court's definition, not mine.
Yeah. So I can guess what you like about Audition, because that's come up on previous calls. What'd you like about Old Boy?
Old Boy, to me, was one of the first times I experienced South Korean cinema and its absolute middle finger to tone. And that is, going all the way back to Shakespeare, not having a dominant tone is one of my favorite things. If something can be funny and horrific and serious, funny without losing the stakes and the moral and the damage being done to the characters, but it still keeps a sense of humor, that is just caviar to me. That's catnip to me. And Old Boy is so funny. It's so gonzo. It is so action packed. The hallway scene, of course, is the thing people always come back to, but also just the the unremitting bleakness that never loses its wink, and it never loses that sparkle in its eye. And that's something that I think South Korean cinema does in general. Like, Parasite's another great example. Memories of Murder is another great example. There are just so many.
Anyone called Sweet Home that was Korean?
Yeah, Sweet Home is fucking great and batshit. It's like, what if the makers of Delicatessen made a fucking end of the world apartment complex apocalypse story? It's gonzo. It's absolutely hilarious. And it's also serious, and it will rip your heart out in times. All of Us Are Dead is another one that's really great. Yeah, so like Old Boy to me was, I think, the real first time I encountered that, and it felt like coming home. It felt like seeing what I'd always wanted in a movie. I wanted it to be bleak. I wanted it to hit hard, but I also wanted it to not take itself too seriously. But that doesn't mean camp. That doesn't mean not trying to punch as hard as possible. It just means being absurd. It means saying, like, pain is sometimes funny. It's another thing David Lynch does so well. Like, sometimes he's incredibly funny, and then you're shitting your pants the next minute because it's terrifying. And that is what
that was my first reaction with Wolf Creek 2.
Yeah.
Same thing. It's like, I'm home.
Yeah.
This has everything.
Yeah, he's so funny. He's such a funny, fucking terrifying psychopath.
Yep.
What'd you like about Lake Mungo?
Lake Mungo to me is the opposite
Just
of that.
eerie.
It is not funny.
Yeah, it's not fun. It's like pleasantly unsettling.
Yeah. And the big thing for Lake Mungo for me, I find it to be one of the most unforgettable movies ever. I think about it all the time. It is so disturbing, and I didn't realize how disturbing it was until like a day later. Like, you kind of watch it and you're like, yeah, that's okay. And then suddenly you're like, I can't stop thinking about that fucking cell phone footage. And what would I do if I ran into, I don't want to spoil it. But also for me as an actor, I am such an unforgiving viewer of found footage and documentary, mockumentary movies. If there's any whiff of artifice or performance, however good the movie is, like, I just can't lose myself in it. And Lake Mungo is one of the few times where, like, however they did, I don't know if there was improv involved or how they rehearsed this, their interviews and stuff like that, but it feels so real. I never get the sense that I'm watching people pretending to give an interview. I just feel like I'm watching a family giving an interview. So I just lose myself in it every time. It feels so authentic.
What movie would you say you have watched more times than any other, or book if you would prefer? Book movie?
If it was a book, it would be a Stephen King book. I've reread most of Stephen King like more times than I can count. Movie wise, it could be Fire Walk with Me. It could be Demon Knight. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question.
We've already talked about Demon Knight. So what about why Fire Walk with Me?
Fire Walk with Me, you have to watch all of Twin Peaks first for it to really make a difference. And I love Twin Peaks.
We don't have time for that.
We don't have time. It is a full commitment. In fairness, you don't have to watch all of the new season first, but the first two seasons. But once you have that context, once these characters mean something to you, Fire Walk with Me is, I think, one of the best depictions of confronting death that I've ever seen put to film. It is terrifying. It is absurd. It is disorienting. Sometimes it is, like a lot of David Lynch, sometimes it is just absolutely ridiculous and purposefully flummoxing. And then it is just bone chilling. It is terrifying. And then there is a moment at the very end. And this isn't even a spoiler to say, because this is how Twin Peaks, the show, begins. It is all about Laura Palmer's last day alive. Her last day.
She did.
Up until the death. Yeah, exactly. Up until she's wrapped in plastic. So we know she's going to die this whole time. And the thing about the movie is that she does too. She knows she's going to die. She doesn't know how, and she doesn't know why. And she doesn't quite understand the way in which she's going to die. And by episode, I think it's 14 of Twin Peaks, we know who kills her. So it's watching her start to realize who kills her, and then saying her goodbyes. It's not an easy death. She doesn't want to let go of being alive. And then by the end, she does. And it is this moment of transcendence in the grips of absolute strobic violence. Like, it is a terrifying ending. And then it wraps up in this moment of calm and beauty. And yeah, I don't know. There's something about that is like the mission statement, similar to Martyrs. It's like a thesis paper on horror, on why we go through these traumatic stories to try and find some meaning at the end, some peace at the end. Yeah, it is just beautiful. And it's so weird and it's so funny and like stupid at times. Like, David Lynch just does stupid so well. Stupid and dread. So yeah, I fucking love that movie.
Do you see any common threads about what kinds of horror you like? Cannibalism, occult, metaphysical?
Yeah, a lot of horror that I'm compelled by, and a lot of the horror I write, including my plays, are all about man. Again, I'm using a gender term generally here. Humans' relationship with the divine, with forever, with death, with mortality. You know, it's that little ballet student watching the monster attack the city. It's that feeling of like, I love a story where I actually care about the characters, whether they're good or bad people, but I see something in them that I can relate to, and I can see something bigger than them coming to get them, and watching how they react to that. Whether it is Hamlet realizing he is going to have to kill a king to maybe avenge his father. He still doesn't even know if the ghost of his father is actually real, or if it is the devil fucking with him. And he has to commit the biggest sin in the universe to avenge it. Or, you know, if it's Macbeth realizing his personal ambitions are going to make him destroy everything he cares about. Or if it is the losers realizing they have to fight a fucking cosmic entity who has been around for, you know, millennia at this point. And all they have are their wits about them to try and figure that out. Or if it's just, you know, fucking Old Day Sue realizing that he was kidnapped and put in a room for however many fucking years, and he has to figure out why that happened. And he has to fight a fucking hallway of goons with a hammer.
A whole hallway.
Yeah.
One hammer.
Yeah, and he's not very good at it, but he's fucking committed. Like any of those stories where it's just like a fragile human being up against something so much bigger than them. And trying to find meaning and trying to find survival, or not survival, but trying to find meaning in their lack of survival. That's I find that to be immensely valuable. Like, that's just a story that speaks to me on so many levels.
So this is the spot where we would normally sum up the common threads that we're hearing in the previous parts of the call, and then talk about that a bit. I do actually have a bit of a summary for you, but it's going to take a little bit.
Diagnose me.
Yes. So I want to approach this as sort of in three phases, and you'll understand when I get through them. So the first one, I really like the summary that you gave earlier in the call of monsters' heroism, and I actually kind of combined a couple things here. So monsters' heroism, strength in numbers, contributing to history, and closure. And if I were to summarize all of what those are, I would say participation.
Yeah.
And then the second layer, if I come back another layer, you mentioned dealing with our relationship with mortality. And I think participation is how you respond to that. That is how you deal with your relationship with mortality. And I would then pull back another layer to address the ADHD stuff.
Latent.
And you use the phrase gonzo in a number of places in this call. And I would say that gonzo/ADHD means participating in everything.
Okay.
Which also kind of ties in with the fact that you're an author, a playwright, a director, an actor, and a musician.
Now we're getting into therapy shit. It's true.
Yeah, right.
It's true.
So normally at this point we would ask, why is this important to you? And I guess really the question is, why is it important for you to participate in everything?
I think I have a number of answers for it, but I think the unsurprisingly, with the number of run-on sentences and tangents I have contributed already. But I think, to try and put it concisely, I love being alive, and being alive fascinates me.
I disagree. I think it's overrated.
It's overrated. It's underrated. It's all rated. It's all we got. But I don't know what happens after we die. I have my own thoughts. I have my own hopes. I have my own suspicions, and I have my own fears about that. But what I do know is that at the moment, this is all I know.
Mm.
And so there is a panic in a certain sense to feeling like we only have a limited amount of time. And I have things that I love to do, and I'm very stubborn, and I'm very ambitious. And some of this is also just a creature living in capitalism and trying to like eke a living out and things like that. But there's a feeling of like, I don't want to not live up to the potential I feel like I have. I've been told I have, all that shit, all that gifted and talented shit. I don't want to let a possibility go by without exploring it as much as I can. Similarly, I love It. I love Ghost Story because these stories tell a bunch of different stories, and all of these different stories contribute to the main story. And then we can parse the meaning of that main story out because of the vivid ingredients that it contains. So for me, I don't want to limit my experiences and my life and the stories that I can tell and the stories that I can witness. That I think is the value, and that I think goes straight back to like getting as many books as I can out of the library. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, if I only get this limited amount of time, I want it to be as vivid as possible. I want it to be as polyphonic as possible.
So I think this is a good point to jump in with the next question, which is usually why horror, meaning there could be any other number of genres where you could explore all these different things. And I think you kind of also already touched on this in what you referenced about giving a middle finger to tone. Because kind of the point with that and Gonzo is that you are exploring these things in other genres, or not other genres, but other tones, shall we say, that are sometimes included in horror. But do you think it's because horror allows for those other tones to be included? Like, for example, we've talked on this podcast before about how if it's any other genre, as soon as you include any amount of horror, all of a sudden it is horror. It is no longer those other genres. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you know what? And I'll flip that on its head, because this is something I say a lot, and I will say a lot until I die. To me, every good story is a horror story, because every horror story just means there's something to lose. There's stakes. Like when Harry Met Sally, if they don't get together at the end, that is a horror movie. Because it's just about how like love can't happen, and that's fucking horrifying. Sophie's Choice is a horror story. Every story where there's a possibility for the hero to fail is a horror story. And capital H horror, the genre of horror, is just the one that is a little less cowardly, and it's just like, I'm just gonna fucking manifest these metaphors in a very explicit way.
So all the other genres are what happens if the bad thing doesn't happen. Capital H horror is when the bad thing does happen.
Yeah.
It's when the bad thing intentionally happens.
Yeah, or even unintentionally. Narratively, like the creator is like intentionally making the bad thing happen. Yeah, you're right. And I think there are other genres that sometimes aren't called horror but still are horror. Like, to me, the difference between a thriller and a horror story is that in a thriller, the hero will win at the end, and in a horror story, the hero might not, or the hand will come out of the grave at the end, and there'll be a part 2 or something like that. But a thriller, you kill Buffalo Bill at the end, so there's a little bit more of a wrap up. But even then, I find those to be horror as well. I find a lot of drama, capital D drama stories to be horror stories. There doesn't have to be necessarily a monster or anything like that. But if a story acknowledges how bad it can get, to me, that is just proving my rule that every good story is a horror story.
And taking that to the extreme of, how bad can it get? I mean, that death is how bad it can get. So that kind of goes back with what I said earlier about dealing with our relationship with mortality.
Yeah.
It's almost like, to have a conflict of any kind, it would be considered a horror story. Joseph Campbell would think of that.
I sincerely believe it.
I brought it up this time. Beat you to it.
Well, I think we got some pretty good summaries for you. Do you think that there's anything relevant that you didn't get a chance to say? Maybe thought of something and the conversation took a left turn, or a question we didn't ask?
Two things. One, the person that I hurt as a kid, I'm going to be telling a fictionalized version of that in the book that I'm writing right now.
Oh.
So stay tuned for that. We didn't get to it, but that'll be my little tease about my fallout with my best friend when I was a kid. And I guess I just feel compelled to say, I really do try and be a good person now. I'm sorry I was such a piece of shit as a kid. I don't conduct myself that way anymore. I swear.
It's funny, the very last person we interviewed, he was telling us one of the stories. He's like, he stops and pauses. He goes, wow, I really don't come off too well in this story, do I?
Yeah. I laugh about it now, but like I really was a terror. And you know what? Honestly, I think people who have conducted themselves poorly in the past often can learn lessons from that and become better people, not better than other people, but just better versions of themselves because they were shitty. Like as long as there is self-reflection and analysis and growth and stuff like that, of which I have done professionally and amateurly and had done to me, I think, sometimes I find myself really drawn to people who have like a kind of checkered past and understand why the things that they did were wrong.
Good decisions come from experience. Experience comes from bad decisions.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
There you go.
Yeah. So I'm sorry if I painted myself as an absolute piece of shit. I'm just a former piece of shit. It's like that I think you should leave sketch. Yeah. I used to be a piece of
Reform.
shit. Yeah, exactly. I'm a lapsed piece of shit.
I am a polished turd.
Look at the shine.
Sorry.
They said it couldn't be done.
Yes. Well, before we wrap, you want to repeat what it was that you're currently working on?
Oh, yeah. Got a novella coming out in October through shortwave publication called Rest Stop, which should be available for pre-order shortly. And then what is definitely available for pre-order is my next full-length horror novel, When the Wolf Comes Home, available wherever books are sold.
Okay. Well, thank you very much again for your time. And thank
you guys.
Out there listening. Our pleasure. Come visit us at horrormakesushappy.com. We've got a page where we list all of our episodes, bio pages for all of our guests, including Mr. Cassidy. Also have a list of people there that we would like to try to reach out to. If you can get us in touch with any of those, let us know. Support us on Patreon, buy some merch, tell a friend, do all kinds of fun stuff.